Welcome to Accenti's Workshops to Build Community, Engaging Canadian Seniors. This is a project made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program. I'm Lecha Canton, the founding editor-in-chief of Accenti magazine. This is our 9th workshop in Accenti's 3rd series of workshops. Welcome to Nonna 2.0, Debunking the Myth of the Italian Immigrant Woman, with Giuliana COLALILLO. And we're very excited to hear what Giuliana has to say today. Giuliana COLALILLO has had a diverse professional background, including as educational consultant to TVO curriculum and children's programming, as well as professor of psychology and learning design at Sheridan College. Her current research explores the many dimensions of the Italian-Canadian immigrant woman. Welcome, Giuliana. The microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate the fact that you have taken time out of a very busy schedule during the Christmas season, or the holiday season, as we call it now. In a way, I'm happy to be inside today because we have very frigid temperatures in Toronto. It feels more like February than it does December. In any case, I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the information that I have around my thoughts about the Italian immigrant woman, and also hearing what you have to say about it. So you're going to be working with me as we go along to debunk the myth of the Italian immigrant woman who came to Canada. This is the first generation that I'm talking about who primarily came to Canada in the 50s and 60s after World War II. Okay, let's see if I can get this working. So we're going to approach it in 3 different ways. We're going to talk a little bit about the myth, then how the myth somewhat has changed, and then how we can, by looking at some additional evidence, completely debunk the myth. Just to let you know that this is sort of part of a larger project that I sort of took on once I retired from Sheridan. Because I felt that first generation post-World War II Italian-Canadian immigrant women were really not recognized within the history of Italian immigration to Canada. And certainly we have not really heard their voices loud and clear. So here are some of the questions that I would like you to think about as we go through this session. Who is she? Who's that immigrant woman of the 50s and 60s? Do we really know her? Or do we just have a stereotype of her? What are her stories, and where can we hear her own voice? And how did I get interested in this particular topic? Well, I'll give you a little bit of personal history and background. And it all started, of course, with my own mother, who was one of those immigrant women. We came to Canada in the mid-50s. I grew up not in Toronto's Italian community. I grew up outside of the community, and I didn't have a nonna. But yet, what I realized is that I still had a very strong stereotypical view of the Italian immigrant woman. And I began to question that perspective when I met and I attended university and I met other kids of, well, at that time we were sort of like young adults of my own age. And especially when I started to do research on my both of my graduate theses that talked about the Italian immigrants in Toronto. And then, especially as I reflected on my mother's own journey from being an immigrant woman in the 50s and 60s to her becoming what I call a nonna canadese to her Canadian-born grandchildren. She fit the image that was I guess, presented, and I'll show you where I think it was presented in some ways, but definitely not in others. So what was that image? How did she fit into it? She was definitely a contadina. We came from a rural area of Molise, which is considered to be southern Italy. She had only an elementary school education up to grade 5, came to Canada with no particular skills, came to Canada as a dependent, which is to say, as a family class immigrant. My dad had immigrated 3 years before. Religion was a very important aspect of her life in Canada and in Italy. And of course, keeping the family together was very important. How did she not fit that image? How did she break the image that was put forward about the Italian immigrant woman? Well, first of all, she learned to speak English. In fact, she even took some classes at Costi, which was very challenging if you think about a full-time job, because she worked in a factory, looking after all aspects of the family, including my grandfather. But she still tried, and she did speak English quite well at the end of her life. As a factory worker, she was a leader. She fought in a nice way, because she was always very polite, for better pay, for better working conditions, for her peers who were primarily immigrants. She was the family's financial manager. I don't think my father ever stepped into a bank after she started taking over the finances very early on when we immigrated. In retirement, she was also an incredible volunteer, not only at my children's schools, taking my place because I had a full-time job and going on adventures with them when they had class trips, but also won the Comitas Award for her volunteer work at the Columbus Center and Villa Colombo, because we live in that neighborhood of Toronto. Um, she had a lot of life skills, and the one that I wanted to highlight is that she learned how to drive at age 60. And it took her 8 out of 10 driving lessons to get her license. Quite an accomplishment. She learned how to do email in order to communicate with two of her granddaughters who had gone to university out of town, and one of them who lived, or two of them who lived elsewhere afterwards. And as I'll talk to you right at the end of the presentation, she left a legacy because she wrote prose and poetry about her life and her immigrant experience. So that was the inspiration for this, to try and find out, why is it that people still have this perhaps negative stereotypical image of these Italian immigrant women, when I saw in front of my eyes not only my mother, but many of her friends displaying a completely different aspect of it. Well, the genesis, or part of the root um, location, if you will, is that, in fact, immigration history of Italian Canadians is male dominated, and for good reason. I'm not trying to say that it is invalid. All I'm trying to say is that males are often spoke about. We know a lot about the contribution that immigrant males, Italian immigrant males, did to Canada, to the building of Toronto, et cetera, because Canada, if you have to remember, in the 50s and 60s, was a developing nation. It needed an incredible amount of, literally, manpower, the brawn that those males were able to bring and contribute to the city's economic and build the building of it. Um, and the females came along with them, and they were seen primarily as appendages to the husband. As I said, even in my family's case, because we immigrated, because I was a child, 3 years after my father had already been here. And I also want to emphasize that the stereotype that I'm talking about, I think, existed as much within the Italian community as outside of the community itself. It's not that it was a stereotype that was only existing by, let's say, the Anglo-Saxon community. It existed within itself. We had our own prejudices and stereotypes. The other place that you could find this image of the Italian Canadian woman of the 50s and 60s was in early Italian Canadian literature. And I just want to give you some examples. One of the very first novels, as you may know, written about Italians in Canada was called Black Madonna, written by Frank Paci. And the protagonist there, one of them, is Assunta Barone, who is described as a woman dressed in black, who does the weekly grocery shopping, brings the children to and from school, understands little English, and goes to church each Sunday or more frequently. So you can see some aspects coming out there already. In Home Ground, written by Caterina Edwards, Maria is a woman who's afraid to even answer the door or the phone because she doesn't speak English. So we get this image of a woman very closed in within her own family environment. Even Gianna Patriarca talks about these women. And one of I think the most poignant and lovely poems that she wrote in Italian Women and Other Tragedies is, as I can't read it here on the screen because you guys are blocking it, but these women who gave birth, you can read it for yourself. I've seen them around their children. Um, Sorry, your images are blocking my ability to read it, but you can see for yourself that it's a very strong image of a woman who is a suffering woman who gives a lot but doesn't get a lot in return. And then finally, also Maria Ardizzi's novel, uh, Nora, remains an immigrant mother affected by alienation and a victim of exile. And I'm not the only one who argues that these are fairly negative stereotypes, although they have validity in them, as all stereotypes do. In one of the first, in fact, a book, Writers in Transition, based on the proceedings of the very first conference about Italian Canadians that took place in Vancouver, an article, and it's a collection of the proceedings there. Jenny Gunn says this about Italian Canadian literature's depiction of the Italian immigrant woman. Immigrant women in Italian Canadian literature are portrayed by both male and female writers in a variety of ways, most of which perpetuate the stereotypes. There is the silent, suffering immigrant woman, the ignorant immigrant woman, the immigrant woman who accepts her submissive role. Joseph Pivato, who many of you know, is one of the emeritus leaders of Italian Canadian writers and critic of Italian Canadian literature, wrote this: "The unwritten history of Italian immigrant women is one of being disenfranchised, of being limited to a few necessary functions." And this is important. The next sentence: "It's not the historian, but the imaginative writer who's recording the history for the first time. That's the person who's giving us this depiction," he's arguing. "This sad history is now being reflected in images of confined bodies, of handicapped characters, and other forms of restrictions." So if you had to look at the stereotype of the immigrant woman, look at her physical characteristics, her role in the family and culture, her psychosocial adaptation, and her role as a worker, she might look something like this. This is actually a sketch that Francesco Gallet, who's an artist in Toronto, did. And if you look at the physical characteristics, you can see, she's short, wears black, sensible shoes, carries a purse. Those might be some of her physical characteristics. In terms of her role in the family, she's primarily a caregiver, looks after children, cooks, cleans, and so on. In terms of her psychosocial adaptation, the image so far is a person who's maladapted, docile, speaks little English, yes, has very little education, is alienated from the wider culture. And as a worker, there are articles that talk about this, and certainly the historical sense gives you the idea that she's low paid, she works in low paying jobs, is anti-union, unskilled, works long hours, and is exploited. And as I said before, stereotypes are always based on certain realities and facts and truths. However, they magnify them. I like pictorial images like this. I like to summarize things in images like this. And another way that I have found very useful to summarize ideas or concepts is by using what are called word clouds. And we'll do this an activity based on this later on in the workshop, but I just wanted to show you one. And I created this word cloud. This is a word cloud over here, based on inputting essentially all of the slide information that I've shown you to date, all of the words into a script, actually, sort of like a Word document. Imported them into this word cloud program, and this is what I came up with. And The reason that you see some words being larger and others being smaller is because the words that are larger and toward the center of the word cloud are the ones that come up most frequently, most often. They're the ones that carry the most importance, if you will. And then if you look around the periphery of the word cloud, you'll see some of the other aspects that I've talked about. She's from Southern Italy. She's a contadina. She's alienated. She's seen as an appendage. She's submissive. Uh, as very few stories are told about her. Her voices are not heard. So you can point to different aspects of it and talk to them. I found it to be a very useful tool, actually, when you're teaching, as well as being able to capture certain ideas together and then discuss them. So next step, this is where you come in. We're actually going to be doing something which allows you now to see what the image of the Nonna Canadese, who is the immigrant woman who came today, who is the immigrant woman who immigrated to Canada in the 50s and 60s, what she's depicted like in popular culture on the internet. You all have internet access because you're part of this Zoom, so I'm hoping that you'll be able to use it for this exercise. So I'm going to give you you're going to choose from three different activities, which I will describe to you in a moment. And what I want you to keep in mind as you're doing whichever activity you select is to tell us, because we're going to discuss them afterwards, what does she look like? What is she doing in the images that you will see? How does she speak? What type of products have you found or have you seen around her? And how do you think that this particular depiction of her relates to the stereotype image that we've talked about? So here are the three activities that you're going to be doing. Choose one. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. At the bottom right-hand side of the screen, I actually have a timer. You're probably going to hear some kind of a sound when time is up. And then we're going to come back and we're going to discuss what you found. So one of three activities. The first activity, just take note of the website, which is YouTube, and make sure that when you go to youtube.com, in the search box, in quotation marks, put Nonna Maria TV. You're going to find a number of episodes of Nonna Maria. You're not going to have time to sample more than one or two. I'm sure that you will be very interested in sampling more or even looking at a whole one. Try and see a couple of them in order to get a flavor of what Nonna Maria is all about. That's one activity that you might choose. The second one is to look at and find two ads that were run on only Canadian TV by IKEA. So in order to see those, I want you to go to vimeo.com, another website, and again in the search box, in quotation marks, put IKEA Nonna. Okay. The third activity is simply to go to amazon.ca or amazon.com, whichever you prefer, put in the word Nonna and see what kind of products are being featured. Okay, I think you'll be quite interested and quite amazed at what you find. So, is everyone ready? I need to have some kind of an indication that you're ready. Say yes. Put up your hand. Wonderful. Terrific. Choose one activity. It's up to you. And then when we come back, what I'm going to do is choose one or two people who have done each activity, and we're going to talk about it. So off you go to either YouTube, okay, either to YouTube, Vimeo, or Amazon, and tell us what you find. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and I will try and respond to them there. Okay? If you have any problems accessing it, and keep in mind that what you're looking for is the answers to those three questions, to some of those questions. And how does her image match or not match with the stereotype that I've described to you so far? I'm trying to see if there are smiles on any faces that I'm seeing on the screen in terms of what you find. I thought of putting Jeopardy music on, but then tried listening to it and I thought, oh my God, people are going to get so sick of hearing the theme over and over again. I'm sorry that you're all muted. I was hoping that I would hear some laughter. I agree, Rita. She is hilarious.
Yeah, except my mom and my aunt don't like it. They feel like she's making fun of them.
Juliana, Ana Campagna has just entered the Zoom, so I don't know if you want
Anna,
to give a quick
Anna,
summary of what
okay.
we're doing.
What you see on the screen, Anna, are you can choose one of the three activities to do, either A, B, or C. Uh, for the first activity, you would go to YouTube and put in the search box, quote, Nonna Maria TV, sample 1 or 2 episodes. You can choose to go to vimeo.com, the second activity. In the search box, you would put in quotes, IKEA Nonna. And the third activity is just to go to amazon.ca or amazon.com and type in the word nonna to see what kind of objects or presentations, different types of objects or things for sale that you might find that feature nonna. Are you okay with that? I know you're saying something, but I hope it goes forward. Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah, Licha, you're absolutely right. Nonno does take up some space. even when you put in the word Nonna. Okay, we've just got a few more minutes. If you give me an indication that you're done, we can proceed to the discussion. Yes, good, okay. I can't see everyone. So I'm assuming everyone has done something. We'll give it just one more minute. I'm sure that some of you have looked at all three of them, or at least two out of the three, out of curiosity, except if you got intrigued by Nonna Maria. Then you would stay there forever. And Nonna Maria only exists now on the internet. There haven't been any episodes for quite a while.
Actually, I've seen that, so I'm familiar with Nonna Maria.
You've seen it where?
I've seen it. I think one of the, the Italian spots on TV, sometimes they feature that.
Okay, you mean older episodes probably?
Yeah. Perhaps I've even followed them on YouTube. I'm just trying to figure out where I saw it, but I'm familiar with her.
Good.
I do apologize for being late. I had a little emergency to take care of.
Well, I'm glad you dealt with your emergency first and that you were able to join us.
Yes, it was my daughter, so she always comes first, even though she's 40.
I also apologize. Hi, everybody. I was in another meeting. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lucia. Okay, I think we might be ready to discuss. Am I right? So perhaps I at this point I will need some volunteers. So just perhaps one person who looked at Nonna Maria, tell us what you found and what you saw.
Ermelinda has her hand up.
Okay, Ermelinda, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I've been watching Nonna Maria for some time, and the episode Mutandi Wow, where she's doing the dusting with the underwear, and and she's just a riot. But what gets me is that it sort of depicts my upbringing with my mother, because we're from southern Italy. We're from Abruzzo, and I don't know if that's Calabrese, but it's that area. And her swearing when she's pulling, she's doing la spesa, and her swearing trying to get the cart. And I remember taking my mother grocery shopping, and you had to put a quarter in to get the bloody cart, and we
Right.
couldn't find a quarter anywhere, and she's yanking at the thing and swearing just like Nonna Maria, get the butts and all this, and so I can relate so well to like those boys that do the her depiction is just bang on with the way I was raised and the way my mother was and what I carry it with me, and it doesn't bode well because it loses in translation, and you're looked like a real, when you translate some of these words into English, it makes, they sound really bad, but I just, she just depicts the Nonna like I see my own mother, who's now 94, and she still can't adapt to the Canadian way of living and thinking. She still comes with the traditions from the old country, and we just dismiss it as her being her. And we've had to kind of straddle both fields, and it's kind of hard. But and when she's counting the change, aspe, and I've seen that in my mother. She'll do the same thing when she's paying for groceries. She'll go back and count the change that she had. So it's funny, but at the same time, it does typify the immigrant of, the 50s and 60s. I love
Okay.
it. It's hilarious.
Thank you, Ermelinda. Someone else who also looked at the Nonna Maria or sampled some of the Nonna Maria videos or perhaps has seen them before? Okay.
Giuliana, I can comment. It's Anna.
Hi, Anna.
I'd never seen Nonna Maria, I have to admit, so I was a bit shocked by the whole thing. but certainly it was consistent with that stereotype of like, yeah, being rough around the edges, using a combination of dialect and Italiese, like the cornflake and ruggiacchetta. That kind of cracked me up. Yeah, and sort of those signs of being a bit maladaptive and uneducated. So yeah, I think very fit the stereotype very well.
So for those of you who have actually watched some of the Nonna Maria, and it's worth watching all of them. I wonder what you saw that might have been different from the stereotype, or anything that suggests that she isn't the stereotype, because she actually does incorporate, I agree with you, the stereotype. But is there anything more that's there? Is she passive?
Sorry, my dog wants to participate too. No, she seemed pretty aggressive with that shopping cart.
What about her relationship with her grandson? Any sense of it there? So I'll read you some of the comments. Some people aren't going to speak up, but they do say some interesting things. So Rita said, Nonna Maria TV is hilarious. Funny enough that my mom in her 80s does not like it. Does not like it. Oh, that's interesting. Adriana says that Amazon, oh, we'll talk about that in a moment. Who else saw Nonna Maria? Very good question from Rita, but maybe that's something that you can break up later. Is there the same stereotypes in Italy of the nonnas? Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. All right. So Nonna Maria.
Rita Kucha has her hand up.
Thank you, Rita. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, further on the comment that my mom doesn't like. Yeah, my mom in her 80s doesn't like it because she doesn't like, because she's a nonna, but she doesn't like all those stereotypes. Just because she worked. My father had a grocery store in Ottawa, and she worked with him. So she worked as like, she wasn't the typical nonna. Now she does the typical nonna stuff, but she doesn't like all those things because she feels like we're making fun of her. She doesn't like it.
Okay, I can see that as well. Any other comments?
Yeah, I want to make a comment about Nonna Maria. So I didn't view it right now, but I'm just going from memory from when I did view them in the past. And I used to laugh. I mean, it makes me laugh, but I always left wondering, is Nonna Maria a creation of a woman or a man?
Okay, good question. I'll be able to answer that.
I wondered that because of the stereotypes and the perception of a nonna with this kind of stereotype. Because while it made me laugh, I was thinking, is this the way really in a man's head that he saw a nonna, you know? And so we're getting kind of a rehashed perception from a male perspective, an Italian, a nipote, a grandson, right? So, but I'm just wondering that, I'm just sharing that because the more I watched of her, the less I found her funny. So I was thinking, why was that? Is it because I was becoming more critical of her? Is it because the stereotypes were just not acceptable to me anymore, because I mean, I'm a nonna now. I had my nonnas, and they weren't really like that, although they were phenomenal nonnas, they got their way, they framed things, they were protective, they were actors, they acted, So I just wanted to share that from my memory. But I will go after this, go and review these episodes on YouTube again.
I think, Anna, you're making some very valid comments. And as we go through the rest of the workshop, I want you, all of you, to keep some of the comments that Anna made in mind, because there is definitely a reality. So first of all, let me explain that, in fact, Nonna Maria was created by a man. It was created by Anthony Imperiali in Montreal. So the perception that perhaps it is perhaps a man's image of the nonna may or may not be the case. The fact that she speaks a mixture of broken English, as Anna Romano said, and her Southern Italian dialect. Actually, it's a dialect that's very close to Napoletano, Abruzzese, Molisano, completely understandable. Not so much Calabrese, which is a really difficult accent to understand. I have had a Calabrese mother-in-law, and it took me 20 years to begin to understand even half of what she said, because she only spoke the dialect, un dialetto molto chiuso, like a very tight, didn't speak Italian, spoke limited English. One of the comments, though, that I'd like to make about Nonna Maria is that she isn't a passive female. She really does take the bull by the horn. If you watch some of the other episodes, she does take control, if you want to put it that way. And she was a very popular character. She became a regular, I found out, on Global News Morning in Montreal. And for those of you who live in Montreal, I don't know, Anna, where you live, but maybe that's where you would have seen her. She's quite an interesting character. Not a lot of analysis has been done on her, and that's one of the things that I want to take on as part of this project as well. I haven't seen all of the episodes, but like you, Anna, I have an emotional reaction to her at different levels, because she does represent, as any stereotype does, some reality and some fabrication, like overemphasis. Okay.
Yeah, can I say something? You mentioned, how do you think she acts with her grandkids? I think she's depicted by, I think it would be a grandson, I'm assuming. And it's the way he sees her, and it's, I think, the way my grandsons see me. They kind of roll their eyes in the back of their head.
Right.
There's an episode where he comes in with McDonald's and she's freaking out because McDonald's, she's all shocked because he's eating McDonald's and she wants to offer him pasta and stuff like that. So she's a caring nonna, and yeah, I don't think she's passive because she doesn't cave and say, yeah, I eat McDonald's, enjoy it. She's shocked that he would go eat McDonald's over what a nonna can provide for her grandchild. So it's very interesting if you watch all the episodes. I could see a lot of my own mom in her, as I'm sure my grandsons see me in there, because I've picked up some of those habits and traditions.
Okay, thank you very much, Edmelinda, for that comment. Could I just want to move on to the IKEA Nonna? Were there any of you who decided that they wanted to explore how IKEA presented her? And maybe you can tell us what you saw. There were 2 short ads that you might have viewed. Did anyone see them? Hands up. Yep.
Hi, Giuliana.
Hi.
I'm Rosie. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
I did watch the 2 IKEA Nonna ads, and I actually remember even seeing them on television a couple of years ago, maybe.
Oh, more than that, but yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mean, we see her in her kitchen, very in charge of her kitchen, with a big family, right? Her big family looks like her kids and grandkids all around her. She looks like she sometimes is losing her patience with some of them, I would say. And then I find it interesting that maybe it's in this, I don't know which one it is. I guess in both of them, they're the same, where they're all huddled around her and they're waiting for her to taste this. It's probably tomato sauce or something. I can't really tell whether she's, happy with the results. Like it seems like was she doing the cooking, or did she allow someone else and then she's testing it to make sure that it's up to her standards? It's, for me, I find it a little bit difficult to figure out what's going on at the end, but basically I see a strong Nonna. in charge of her kitchen and making decisions about the food that everyone's about to, I guess, sit down and eat together. So it's like I see some of the stereotypes where, you know, it's about food, it's about family, it's about, food and family, but also I see this strong woman that probably comes out a lot when she's in her own element, when she's surrounded by the people that she loves. And yeah, that's what I notice.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. Did you watch the other one by any chance, or just there were two commercials? That one,
Yeah.
she's in the kitchen, and the other one features her inspecting, I guess, the kitchen that her granddaughter has just put
Right.
together.
Yeah, no, I only watched the first one. I
Hey,
had
that's
trouble
great.
accessing. So in the other
Oh,
one, I think I saw it on television. So she's
okay,
just kind of going through her kitchen and she's seeing if it's up to her standards, etc.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm going
Okay.
to ask Leanna, who has her hand up for comments.
Yeah, hi. I have a lot of feelings about the IKEA one, just because when you look at it in the larger sense, they're exploiting and they do what all commercials do. And I think a lot of us sort of have that feeling of something comes on TV and you're like, wow, this feels very like interesting and cinematic and there's a story. And then a logo will come up at the end and there's that sense of like betrayal that you've been taken in by this really interesting narrative structure only to be sold a product at the end or for someone to try to sell you a product. And that's just sort of the point. But because it depends so heavily on Italian stereotypes, and I think some of us will have that very visceral reaction of, why are you trying to use my culture against me to sell me something that I don't want? And especially with that song, Luna Mezzomare, I hear it and I immediately think this is someone who's not Italian, but who knows Italian culture well enough to be able to push all of the buttons and to hope that eventually one button that you push will inspire someone to spend money on a product that they're selling. Anyway, I think it was, like you said earlier, Giuliana, like it's sort of the stereotype sort of come in and hit us in different ways because they're based so often in truth.
Mhm.
And I thought one thing that struck me and I thought that was really interesting was the figure of presumably the nonno who comes in and then immediately turns around and goes back out. Based on the stereotype of the Italian woman, the woman will be submissive and listen to everything that her husband says, and perché comanda lui and all that. But in the domain of the kitchen, I think it's interesting to see how some Italian men the roles will be reversed. And a lot of Italian men of that generation, I think, will almost be dismissive of their newfound status. Now they're the ones who are sort of relegated to this secondary role, and they try to spin it to say, oh, well, your nonna, she knows everything, and just do what she says, and I don't know anything in the kitchen. And so there are a lot of really interesting patterns that come up, and to see it displayed in the commercial in those few seconds where Nonno appears and then disappears, I think is really interesting.
Thank you, Leanna. Excellent comments. Anyone else? So absolutely, do you think that the commercials were effective? Do you think that Italians, because they were clearly directed at the Italian community of Canada, and I don't know, and I haven't been able to follow up if there was an increase in kitchen sales of IKEA, but the point being that they are taking a stereotype. What did she look like? She's a stout woman dressed in black. In fact, the character isn't even Italian, just to let you know. She's of a different background. And what are the only words that she says in both? And how does she say them? She says them in Italian, and you need to have the subtitles underneath. So here's a woman dressed in black, only speaks Italian. You need a subtitle, and everybody needs her approval. Rosie, the point about the commercial that you described is that in fact, yes, they are cooking together, but in the end, they didn't receive her stamp of approval. She told them to get out because my interpretation is she's going to fix it. right? She's going to make the sauce right. She doesn't approve of it. So her approval becomes important. Everybody walks out kind of sad and dejected. They didn't do a good job. I think the point about seeing her in the kitchen cooking reinforces that stereotype. Your comments, Liana, about the male, I will talk about later, but it is very important that he sees what's going on and immediately turns around and walks out. When I first saw the commercial, I hadn't even paid attention to him. I was focusing in the front. It was one of my daughters who said, "Look at the nonna walking out in the background." But keep this in mind. These commercials were seen across Canada. So if people didn't have an image of the nonna, what image were they receiving? And I think you did comment on the image that they received, which was not necessarily a positive one, in my view. Okay, any other comments before we move on to the internet scavenger hunt? Okay.
Can I just very briefly? I agree with you, and the energy that Nonna puts in cutting, the stuff with the knife, and I think IKEA was really kind of dull in not using that energy, placing Nonna in another part of the house, like in the office, doing something with like a change in perspective, something unusual that we wouldn't expect, that would have been much more interesting. I think this is very banal, very, very, very low level, and it doesn't really helps any idea of the Italian mess here in Canada.
Absolutely. It doesn't promote it as her being anything different than this little woman who's in
really cheesy.
But can you just imagine though, IKEA trying to make it in a community that excels in building homes and kitchens, right?
Yeah.
Even that is kind of extreme. And I'm just looking at, I didn't watch the commercials, but I'm looking at the images you posted.
Right.
And it's just so it's laughable, the stereotypes are really laughable.
Giuliana, Lucia Cagliese has a full disclosure comment in the chat that's quite interesting.
The Lucia Gagliese?
Lucia, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. It says, I wonder if the nonna stereotype really is passive. My nonna and now my mom and all the nonnas I've known are much more characterized by astonishing strength and voice than passivity. Thank you.
Actually, I'm going to read the last one at 12:49. Full disclosure, a family member created the IKEA ads. It is basically that person's parents' marriage. The wife does wear black, death of sister, and yes, the ads were incredibly effective. Where is the line between truth and stereotype?
Okay. It's basically the person's parents' marriage. Okay, I thought that it was not, but okay. Thank you for that. I didn't realize that. Lucia, I'd like to know more about it because I don't know enough about the background of the commercial. I don't know how effective it was. The point being, the point that someone made about Italians building houses, the kitchen is the center of the house. There's an old saying, I'm trying to remember it now in Italian, that if the father dies, if the mother dies, the center of the family disappears. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the quote right now. And the kitchen is the center of the family. And I think IKEA was playing on that. What Lucia says, we'll talk about in a moment when I talk about how the changing stereotype of the nonna develops over time, because a lot of the comments that you make, in fact, are a nice segue to the next section of the presentation. But before we move on, I would really like to hear from people who did the scavenger hunt. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to comment that both of the songs that, for those of you who did or want to look at those commercials, both of the songs in the background are very important. In fact, one of them, the very first commercial, where she's inspecting the kitchen of her granddaughter, is a song by Claudio Villa, which was featured in the movie Big Night, an American movie, which looks at, I won't describe it, but it's two brothers who are trying to set up a restaurant in New York City. One who's a perfectionist with Italian cooking, and the other one who understands the Italian-American preferences. And in the second film, as Anna pointed out, C'è la luna mezzo mare was featured in The Godfather Part 1. So they were deliberately, in my view, picked because of the resonance that they had to Canadians and Americans, I guess the ones in Buffalo who would watch Canadian television, in order to get them thinking about those particular perceptions of Italians. Okay, people who did the Nonna scavenger hunt, willing to speak up. There were a couple of comments. I'm trying to go back into the chat now. Adriana says that Amazon reduces the nonna to only the kitchen and the home, aprons, dish towels, cutting boards, and the occasional photo frame to feature her grandchildren are on display. I'm waiting for comments from anyone else who did it other than, I'll continue reading from the chat unless one of you saw those. Sorry, I'm just going through the chat.
I'm happy to speak to what I said.
Sure, thank you.
I don't think I've ever looked up the word nonna before on Amazon. And so I was a little surprised, but not surprised to find that it was aprons and the dish towels, some cutting boards and photo frames, which makes me think that that's the only gift idea that people can really come up with, because of course the nonna would only ever be in the kitchen and only ever be surrounded by her photographs of her family, perhaps, and nothing else, nothing beyond that. They also had some, a lot of these aprons or dish towels have very cheesy expressions on them. You know, just about nonna spoiling you and you only eat what nonna makes you and all of these things, which is both a compliment, of course, to nonna and the stereotype of the nonna being an amazing chef and feeding her family and friends, etc. But I find is kind of, I don't know, a little insulting that you're just reducing this woman to the kitchen and only the kitchen.
Thank you, Adriana. Anyone else comment on it? Yes, please.
I went to the Amazon and I agree with Adriana. It is, I see grandchildren, you know, English language grandchildren going to buy these items. You know, my nonna's the best, the frame. Interestingly, I did see at least 3 children's books. N is for Nonna, and another 2. And there was a bracelet as well, that with a charm that said Nonna. But as we all know, Italians would not buy a bracelet for Nonna on Amazon. They'd go to the local jewelry store in Little Italy.
Any other comments about the Nonna scavenger hunt? It is, to me, it was an eye-opener. As Adriana pointed out, by the way, Adriana is my daughter, so she has a bias in this, that everything about the Nonna is creating what I call a cult of Nonna on the internet. It's like Nonna has now become this magical, mythical person, and you can only see her in a good light. So in a way, you've sort of put aside all of those negative stereotypes, but at the same time embedded those stereotypes in the way that she is depicted. Lots of really good comments, by the way, in the chat. Let's see if I can gather some more.
I was just, if I can just jump in here for a second while I can speak. I'm just quickly doing the Amazon task with words like grandma and baba and all those sorts of words that I can think of. And it's all the same products. They just change the word or the language. So I think we need to think about, is this just a stereotype of grandparents versus Italian grandparents?
You mean they have
Right.
the exact same products? I haven't done.
Many, they're books, they're kitchen related things, no one's food is as good as grandma's, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting idea that this might be actually tapping more into a generational stereotype or even an ageist stereotype, right? And then what piece of it is Italian, right? I think it's very nuanced. It's much more it's probably more interesting than just an Italian nonna piece.
Well, you're
You know what I
opening
mean?
up a whole, very good. It's a whole new line of investigation. I'll have to follow that up. But you're absolutely right. We do tend to always stereotype, mythologize the older generation. We make them into something that aren't necessarily something that we experience directly. I certainly experienced, for example, with my own, I didn't have a nonna, so I can't speak to that. But as I saw my mother relating to my children, it certainly was the case that she became a caring, loving figure, and they
Yeah.
didn't see her for the immigrant woman that I remember experiencing as a child. So we're separating the two pieces, if you will, right?
Right. So that, if I can just, actually someone who studies aging. So that's actually a really common experience that with our children, we're different because we're dealing with the burdens of being employed and paying a mortgage and all of that stuff. With our grandchildren, we tend to be gentler, kinder, more compassionate, more giving. So it's an internet meme, right? Like I look at my mom with my kids and wonder, where was this lady when I was growing up? So it's really interesting because you're tapping into a lot of the stereotypes of aging here more generally.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I'm also trying to, and I agree with you, but I'm also trying to say this is what we hold about the nonna, so that an IKEA commercial could be made using that stereotype, right? So that if you read the literature, they focus on that stereotype too. Okay. Um, Let me go on, and I really appreciate the comments that you make, Lucia, around ageism, because that is something that many of us who have white hair experience all of the time. Okay, so what I think we've talked about is the stereotype that exists within popular culture, which is one that was, in a sense, reinforced, as I said, by the history of Italian Canadians in Canada, certainly by the early Italian Canadian literature. Um, so the myth, though, began to change somewhat. So there was a conference very early on in 1977, one of the very first conferences that actually had Italian immigrant woman in the title. North America was misleading. North America includes Mexico. There was no Mexican representation at all at this conference. I happened to be at it. But in the preface, Robert Harney, who was a very well-known historian of Italian Canadians in Canada, said that the conference recognized a truth, that the real world of women was also the real world of men and women. As immigrants, workers, daughters, lovers, wives, and mothers, women shared the Italian American/Canadian experience. Um, that had never been talked about before within the historical context. Remember the quote that I gave you earlier from Jenny Gunn and Joseph Pivato talked about how, in fact, her depiction had been quite negative, and that it was presented by and large by the writers within, at that time, Italian Canadian writers of first and second generation. There was the Multicultural History Society in the early 80s was a very prominent organization that really did a great deal of research, which is sort of buried now. And they had a journal that they published called Polyphony, and they featured an entire journal on Italians in Ontario and two articles, one written by myself and another written by Franca Iacovetta. We were both graduate students at the time. I was glad that they included them in there because both of us were working on different aspects of the Italian Canadian community and talked about how the woman was a bridge, a very important bridge between the two cultures that, in fact, helped with the family's adaptation to the receiving culture, which would have been the Canadian culture. But it was really another development that I feel really moved the story along in terms of how the Italian Canadian woman was presented. And that was a 1985 article, and you can certainly look this up in the New York Times, that raised anxiety, certainly within the United States, about the fact that there was an increasing number of single immigrants, not just Italian, immigration in general, was becoming more an increasing number of female immigrants to the United States, and they were concerned about how that was going to have an impact on the labor market. It was a very controversial claim, and a claim that led to a lot of really good research on the intersection between gender and migration, which hadn't been done before. Remember, I said that women were largely considered to be appendages to their husbands, immigration first. Women were not really looked at, and then this work was begun. And it was begun also with respect to certainly Italian American immigration, less so Italian Canadian immigration. But it led to a burgeoning field within feminist history, within feminist sociology, etc., to look at patterns of migration, to understand what the historical, economic, and cultural contexts were with them. And finally, women immigrants in general were put on the map. The myth also changes because of a lot of social science research that was happening during the 80s and certainly into the 90s. My own PhD thesis, which looked at the two models of what were called adaptation of Italian immigrant families, the culture conflict novel or the continuity model, showed that in fact the continuity model, when you looked at the value structures, when I did interviews with separately mothers, fathers, and their teenage kids, it was definitely the continuity model that was more reflective of their underlying values. Many of you would have heard of the work that Franca Iacovetta did, who basically explained and showed how the contadina, who had immigrated, had now become an industrial worker and all of the implications of that for her family. A terrific study published in the Canadian Ethnic Studies Journal by Bonar basically came to the conclusion after doing interviews with, I think, 27 or 30 elderly immigrant women, that unlike the notion that the man was the pater familias, as Liana pointed out, now the women never saw themselves as that. They always saw that they ran the show, and in fact had an incredible degree of influence over the financial decisions that the family made, even though people would often regard them as only people who stayed in the kitchen. But if you talked to them and if you explored the family dynamics, as she did in the interviews, quite a different picture emerged. And that same picture was reflected in the work that Giovanna Del Negro did when she analyzed the conversations that Italian immigrant women had amongst themselves, women's talk, if you will. And she discovered that, in fact, they often subverted the cultural stereotypes and the cultural values that that were promulgated generally, and that they present a very, very different picture of what life was like for the women, although they never would have contradicted that or never would have admitted that outwardly. But if you listen to conversations amongst themselves, it was a very different story. And this really resonated with me because as a teenager growing up in Canada, I often remember my mother saying to my sister and myself that she felt sorry for us. Why? Because she said, you never participated in a woman's world. You had to learn about life by being taught about it rather than by hearing about it, real experiences that girls would learn by being at the elbows of the grandmothers and the mothers as they did chores around the table or as they did sort of women's things like cooking or in this case, working in the countryside. And of course, the interviews, a huge number of interviews that Colangelo did in a self-published book, unfortunately, so not many people know about it, again, really showed a different dynamic that was going on within the family and the way that the women themselves saw themselves. So again, social science research, very important aspect of it, because what it essentially did is it created now a different stereotype or a different image of the Italian immigrant woman. She's a much more dynamic individual. She holds a key role to the family's well-being. There's evidence of her ability to adapt. She's an agent of change, and she's an immigrant in her own right. All of these shift the image that we have of the woman in the literature, and if you read the in the social science literature. And a lot of this also begins to come through in more current Italian Canadian literature. Interestingly, much of it written by the daughters of that first generation. So just to give you, those are some examples that I have put up on the screen, but I'll just give you two, perhaps, quotes from two books, one of them from Mary Melfi's memoir called Italy Revisited. And for those of you who don't know the book, she creates a conversation with her mother, but it's really her writing about her story. And one of the things that comes out very clearly is Mary Melfi's understanding of her mother. And one quote, which is, "My life started in America. I got my bearings here. I like this country. Nobody's ever said a derogatory word against me being Italian." And one of the stories in the collection by Gianna Patriarca talks, she's sitting in a cafe, she's just finished reading something about Italian immigrant women, and then she comes across a newspaper article and which basically says, quote, "The lives of immigrant women are not interesting enough to put on stage." And the reader's reaction in the story is that she knocks over her cup, spills her coffee. The words on the page swell and merge into a blend of sweet chocolate and ink, and I cannot stop laughing. Laughing at what? The fact that somebody could say that the lives of immigrant women are not interesting enough to be put on stage. So just two examples of how even more recent contemporary Italian Canadian literature is revisiting and recasting the image that we have of Italian immigrant women. So I'm going to go back to you now. Remember the word cloud that I showed you before, which summarized that stereotype that came out of the first set of historical and Italian Canadian literature. Now we've got a new set. And so what I want to do is work with you to create a new word cloud that would represent some of the physical characteristics of this woman, her role in the family and culture, her psychosocial adaptation, and her role as a worker. So perhaps I'm going to ask each of you to give me 2 or 3 adjectives that you would use to describe her in any one or any of these categories. And what I'm going to do is, on a different computer, I'm actually going to type up those words and put them into the word cloud and show it to you toward the end of the presentation. Okay, so we're just going to take less than the amount of time that I had allotted for this. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And just really quickly, if you wouldn't mind giving me 2 or 3 adjectives that would represent this new role of the Italian immigrant woman. And I'm just going to move over here to this computer and I also have to turn a light on. Okay, would you like to start? Anybody? Give me a couple of adjectives that would capture this new image of the Italian immigrant woman as depicted by the social science research or the more recent Italian Canadian literature. I don't want to
asking us to unmute and say them? Yeah.
Yes, please just give me 2 or 3 characteristics each. And I'm just going to take a few minutes on this. Anybody?
Assertive.
Assertive. Okay, thank you. And don't forget that the word cloud will depict, the more often an adjective is used, the larger it will become in the word cloud. So if you also want to use the word assertive again, that's fine. If you want to, and I'll put in whatever you have to say.
She's proud woman.
Proud? Mhm.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I would
Is
say
a leader.
A leader? Okay.
insightful.
Insightful. Okay.
Ages.
Say why she's insightful. Just anything else to add?
Intelligent.
I'm going to ask you to speak one at a time. Ermelinda, did you say something? Maybe I'll just see what is on the screen. Ermelinda, did you say something?
No, I didn't. Not that time.
Thank you. Anna?
It was me. It was me. Courageous.
Courageous, Rosetta. Thank you. Anything else?
I would say elegant, ironic.
Elegant, and I'm sorry, what's the second word?
Ironic.
Ironic. Uh-huh. Yes? Nothing else comes to mind?
Intelligent.
Thank you.
There are a bunch of words in the chat. Would you like me to read them, Giuliana?
Thank you.
I would say also slim. Again,
Slim.
she's not fat, so she's slim.
Good, thank you. Licha, do you want to read some?
Yes. Strong.
Mhm.
Mentor.
Yep,
Inspiring.
yep.
Leader.
Mhm.
Trailblazer. Elegant. Resilient. Clever. Resourceful. Resourceful, again, twice, resourceful. Wise. Mentor. Creative. Self-deprecating. Empathic. Funny.
Funny, okay. Are we done?
I would say realistic and problem solving.
Realistic and problem solving. Okay, anything else?
Proud.
Sorry,
Proud.
proud?
Oh, I said proud, yeah.
Yep.
What's the word to describe that she doesn't forget where she came from, though? Her roots are important to her. And she
Grounded.
Grounded?
Yes,
Maybe.
yeah.
We have more words. Storyteller.
Mm.
Vain.
Vain.
Vain, yeah, vain. Artistic. Self-indulgent.
Mhm.
Understanding. Patient.
Good.
Can we
Excellent.
add hard worker
Hard worker?
or hardworking?
Yep. Okay, that's a really good list. Is there anything that you want to re-emphasize?
Intelligent.
Anything else?
Genuine. Genuine.
Okay.
Disciplined.
Disciplined. Okay.
Organized.
My mother certainly was.
Generous.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear that one.
Generous.
Generous.
Yes, generous.
Thoughtful.
Mhm.
Oh, there's more. Intolerant.
Mm.
Biased. Somebody wrote, Lucia wrote biased.
Okay. I think I got it.
Opinionated too. Opinionated.
Sorry, Licha.
Opinionated. In a positive way.
Okay, I'm going to call it. That's it. I'll show you the word cloud hopefully at the end of this because I want to go on to the final section, which is really to talk to you about, and I appreciate all of the comments that you've made so far. But I want to put forward to you that a lot of what you have told me in your commentary on the initial stereotype, certainly the popular culture depiction of the Nonna, and also put together with what primarily the daughters of these immigrants and some of the social science research has talked about. Put all of those things together, and I feel that there's still a missing element of it. And I'm talking about specifically the voices of the immigrant women themselves. And I want to read to you a quote, which, although it was written, and I'm going to see if I have to move it over for myself. Although it was written in 1985 by an Italian-American historian named Helen Barolini, really is relevant even for today. So she's talking about where these Italian-American women came from, but you can say the same thing about Italian Canadians. They came mostly from forebears without ingrained customs of learning. They came speaking dialects. They came without a literary tradition. They came from a male-dominant world where their roles were rigidly restricted to home and family. They came as helpmates to their men, as mothers of their children, as bearers of the old cultural ways. The creativity went elsewhere. And I think it was very nice to see someone talk about their being creative, because this is an important aspect that we often miss. Their creativity went elsewhere, managing their homes, growing the gardens, making the bread, elegant needlework. My mother was a terrific crocheter, and we're not paying enough attention to these things that they produced. Though they brought native strengths, sharp wits, tenaciousness, family loyalty, patience, and courage, which are skills for survival, and you gave me some of those characteristics, they did not acquire the nascent writer's tool of education, confidence of language, the leisure to read, the privacy for reflection. And I think that holds very much for the women that we're talking about. So part of my Nonna Canadese 2.0 project started off with doing one-on-one interviews with women who were in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. And I've beginning to condense some of these interviews. I have so far about 18 of them interrupted by COVID. Into sort of themes that have arisen from them. And I'm very much aware that we're running out of time. So just to say, and I'm going to not read the quotes from them, that a lot of the interviews talked about personal freedom, self-esteem, socialization to what they experienced outside of their culture, activism and independence. So this woman, for example, at age 82, immigrated in 1956 at age 20. I started to work in the laundry, she said. I had a bit more freedom. I found an English-speaking friend who really warmed up to me. She really wanted to teach me English. There was a cafe nearby, and she would buy me a Coca-Cola, a donut, and a coffee crisp with 10 cents. We became friends. She taught me many words in English and also to eat donuts and coffee crisp. So you can see that working outside the home had an impact of her. This woman, age 83, she immigrated at age 21 in 1956. When you finished work, run, 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 take the bus, cook, wash, clean the house. Who else would do all of these tasks? Wash all the clothes by hand, no washing machine, no refrigerator. Socialization. This woman started to work at the hospital. She said to her sister-in-law said to her, maybe they're hiring people to come and clean. I remained there for 20 years. I liked to work. I became friends with fellow Italians, with the Italian bosses. I felt good. I enjoyed myself at the hospital. For me, it was entertainment, almost. The friends there, all the nurses, everyone spoke to me, told me things. In the hospital, there was harmony. And I got similar quotes, and I'm very much aware of how little time we have left because I want to go on to one other aspect of the work that I'm doing. Similar quotes for activism. Certainly, as I said before, my mother was an activist within her own family, and so did this woman who immigrated at age 29 and 80. She basically forced her boss to give her the shift that she wanted, which was the day shift, by literally leaving the job and then being called back because obviously she was a valuable worker. Or this woman who essentially found a degree of independence by going to work because her husband was ill, could not work, and so had to do all of the work herself with 3 small children and took the night shift. The part that's missing is the writing of the Italian immigrant women themselves. And so right now, what I've been trying to do is to collect and see if there are autobiographies or memoirs. And I actually can say that, as you know, about memoirs or any kind of autobiography, the writing carries personal meanings and benefits for the author, but it clearly augments our understanding of, in this case, the immigration and adaptation experiences, and we hear their own voices. This is their own writing. And I just want to quickly show you the writings of 3 women that I have come across who have written books. One of them is Maria Zarone. She now lives in Toronto. She has actually written 3 books, 2 of poetry in Italian and one a novel in English. And just an excerpt from her latest one called Pensieri, Parole in Poesia. And for those of you who don't read Italian, I've done a rough translation in English. But here she's talking about memories that she had. A bit of her story: she immigrated to Canada at age 16, 5 days after an arranged marriage with a man that she had hardly spoken to. And so her poetry and her books reflect this incredible longing for a different kind of life and also for the past, but at the same time, an amazing wish to go forward and carry on with her life. I actually met her, I looked her up, met her at a Tim Hortons. We had a fantastic conversation. And despite the things that she writes, she has an incredible zest for life and is quite happy as a woman. And this is one, Sentieri di Ricordi. She talks about it, what it was like to be a child in Italy. And in this one, oops, sorry. Let me go back if I can. Nope. She talks about missing her mom. Stella Bordignon has written a pretty voluminous book in which she presents her life story in essentially about 200 vignettes that you could read in order or pick up at any time. Things like this: travel to Rome, what it was like for a 16-year-old to travel to Rome with her mother for the health examination that you needed. Like Maria, she immigrated at 16, but she came with her mother to join the rest of her family in Toronto. She'd never boarded a train or slept in a hotel. She didn't even know how to order from a menu in a restaurant. And at age 35, after you read about her story until then, by then she's married, she has 2 children, she has a custom-built home because her husband is a contractor. She questions who she is. She says, as a result of my authoritarian upbringing, she realized I didn't know who I was. I realized that I still had feelings of inadequacy and an identity crisis. This, despite the fact that she had been very active in her community, very active in her children's school. She goes back to school and she becomes a social worker. Very interesting story. This book, I think, is available on Amazon, whereas Maria Zarone's are not available anywhere. The third type of diary or journal is this, unpublished. This is what I found after my mother died. My mother was known for reciting and writing poetry for special occasions, like the annual festa from our town, for birthdays and so on. But she also wrote diaries and you can see on any scrap of paper that she could find. In fact, the one on my left is she cut parts of my thesis work. You can see that computer paper and bound them together and wrote on them. And this is what I'm finding, and I've just started reading them 13 years after she died, where she describes what it was like to be left in Italy by herself and women who were left that way, whose husbands immigrated for periods of time, were called white widows. She said, I was alone with my young daughters, one 3 and the other 5 years old. I worked like a beast. The countryside, the animals, you couldn't find people to do any work. It was agony for me. I wasn't used to it alone. I didn't know what to do or what to decide, because we always discussed these things together and consulted on everything. And one fine day, you find yourself alone with a weight so enormous that I didn't know how to carry it. And she writes that way in a lot of the other things that I've read so far. So I just wanted to round that out by saying that we read a lot about the woman. Now it's time to read what she has written. And I actually ask you that if you know of any women who do write or have written about their lives, to let me know. Perhaps I can contact them. I'm trying to collect these kinds of material, with possibly trying to do something together with them. And so as a final activity, Alicia, if you permit, because I know we're running out of time, maybe for yourselves, I don't think we're going to have time to share. If you were asked to write a thoughtful, caring note that essentially said to the person, a caring note for the lack of understanding of the Italian immigrant woman's contribution to their families and Canadian society, what might you say? What might you say to that woman?
Juliana, if you would like, if people would like to stay an extra 5 or 10 minutes, we can do that.
Oh, that would be fantastic. So if you want to give yourself a few minutes or begin to tell me what it is you would say to these women that perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to say, in terms of, in my view, how they for a long time have been represented and have not been seen as immigrant women in their own right. Would anyone like to share?
I think I would like to just, I'd probably start off by thanking them for their sacrifices. And I'm talking about, I guess, coming to a new country, a new world for them, a new way of living, and I can't imagine doing something like that myself at this age, and trying to move to a different country and kind of start all over. So I see it as I see what they did as a way of, improving their lives a little bit. But it's a big sacrifice to do something like that. And I think they should be thanked for taking these chances.
Thank you. Anyone else? It was a chance that they took, because a lot of them didn't really know where they were coming. As you know, there was the dream of L'America, and then there was the reality, the streets were paved with gold. They came here and they found out that they had to pave them. I'm sure you've heard that before. And a lot of the women didn't pave the streets literally, but built a lot of the underpinnings of how the family could succeed. For example, one of the things that we never talk about, or rarely talk about, is their economic contribution, not simply for those who worked outside of the home, where they brought some salaries in, but think of how much work it is to preserve things. to can the tomatoes, to can the this and the freeze the that. And for some immigrant families early on, certainly mine, that made the difference, especially in the winter, between able to eat properly and afford the groceries and not. And I'm sure a lot of other families had that same experience as well, where that kind of ability to put things away really helped a great deal. Anyone else care to comment?
There are some comments in the chat as well, Juliana.
Okay, would you mind reading them, Licha? Because
Yeah, I'd love to. Yes, hold on just a second. All right. And some people have indicated that they had to leave.
that's
So,
fair.
okay. Liana, we stand on your shoulders. Thank you. Anna Romano, thank you for doing all that you did to give your children a better life. Rita Kucha, yes, thank you for your courage and guidance. Lucia Masachesi, be aware of the light you brought along from the Mediterranean Sea. And then Rosetta writes, it's a pleasure to listen to you, Juliana, and to see your work. And Lucia Masachesi, a mapping of regional backgrounds must play a major role too.
A mapping of regional backgrounds, the variance perhaps is what.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. This is not anything I would say to such person. It's just my reflection about an observation. It's like something that is missing to me as a newcomer to Toronto, to Canada. I've been experiencing very different, witnessing very different cultural backgrounds, regional backgrounds from the Italian immigrants that I have run into. And that has often made a major difference in the way the Weltanschauung, the life vision, the approach, the culture, the tools, the cultural tools. I'm not creating a classification, a ranking. It's just a matter of different sensitivities, different even family relations and man, woman, gender relations, and so on. So that's a very interesting aspect that I would be very much interested in getting to know better from you.
It's regional, but it's also time, right? Very different aspects.
Yeah, generational, but I feel very generational, but at the same time, I believe very different in the perception of how you relate to the new culture with different tools according to your
absolutely
provision. Yes, and that's very important.
And it's a whole new area to look at.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm very much interested in that. I'm from the Marches, I'm from the Marches, and have a history of women emancipation that is very different from that, from people from women from the north, from the south, from in my country, in my city, Senigallia, the first Italian suffragette, they obtained the right to vote, and that which was then revoked afterwards. But I mean, there was a very, Maria Montessori is from my region. So you see, there are very different degrees of awareness. And I think this has to be taken into account. We have so many different regions, 20 regions means a whole world.
Absolutely. I guess my limit or the boundaries of the work that I'm doing is with the women who immigrated in the 50s and 60s. And if you look at the demographics of those women, it is very different. But that's what my focus is on. Not to say that, the focus on what was happening in Italy with feminism and suffragettes very early on before feminism became a term wasn't there. It's just that the women that I am talking about didn't have a role in that. They came from, as I said earlier, from many impoverished and limited education. So therefore, what did they bring with them and what did they do with the background that they brought with them is what my focus is.
Yeah.
Okay. But thank you very much for your comments. Would anyone else like to add something?
Yeah.
Yes, please, Ermelinda.
Yeah, I just want to say about adaptability. Yes, these women, my mom, and that generation made a lot of sacrifices to come here. Language was a barrier. Cultures and customs, Canadian norms were also a barrier. They lived in Little Italy, so they were able to maintain, what they came with because other Italians, we went to Italian schools. I mean, they were English schools, but Italian enrollment, most of the people. So we were all kind of together. But I came when I was 7 years old, and I was the oldest of 6 kids. And I find that adaptability from my mother, um, while she tried to adapt the Canadian way of life, she didn't accept the norms that Canadian women or Canadian young girls. They were allowed to date, they were allowed to go out. I was set up my marriage was set up with a man from our village. I was 19 when I married him, and she gave him a year's ultimatum when she saw that he was interested in me. She said, I'm giving you a year and then you have to marry her. I didn't know him. I hardly got to know him. And after 17 years of marriage, I left him, but I was never in love with him. And so these are, when I say adaptability, yes, I admire their strength in coming to this country, but they didn't accept all the norms that this country dictated. I always felt like an outcast when I was growing up with my Canadian peers. I sort of broke the ice for the rest of my sisters because they didn't have to go through their marriages weren't arranged. They got to marry who they wanted. They got married in their 20s or mid 20s, whereas I kind of felt I wouldn't let my daughter at 19 today get married. Um, so I kind of swing in the way of I feel sorry for my mom that she had to come to this country and adapt to a new way of life. And I often think that she behaved the way she did because of the way she was brought up, and it was all about bella figura. You can't, like, God forbid that I got pregnant, and that sort of thing. So the more, if she knew I was dating this guy, the sooner she got me married, the less of a scandal there would be. So sometimes adaptability wasn't always good. It was good for some things, but not for that. I wish I could turn the clock back and have been a bit more defiant and a bit more dug in my heels and said no. But I just went along. I mean, you're 19. You just go along with what's being told and you just follow. It wasn't the norm, but you follow what your parents are telling you to do because that's the way we were raised. But I couldn't get my daughters to listen to me if my life depended on it. So there's a shift. It's shifted in one generation. But that's the only thing that I could say was that I found as a negative aspect. And I don't know if it was just my own life or if others were impacted the same way. But I came in 1963, so I was in that bracket.
Thank
So
you.
I
It
found that quite hard.
Yeah, and I think I think absolutely that a lot of immigrant women, there was a variance in terms of their adaptation. Absolutely, some of them maintained to a larger degree the norms of the culture that they came from. Others changed over time, much more rapidly. I can certainly attest to the fact that even in my interviews, what I have found is that some of them moved very quickly into adapting, but into the Canadian culture, not to the degree of letting their daughters necessarily date in the same way that Canadians did, but there was movement, and that's what I'm trying to capture. I think that we are definitely out of time. I think this is a conversation that we could continue, and it is very rich. I just wanted to present to you some of the basics that I am coming across, although there are many aspects, of course, that one could cover in other workshops or in other presentations. I want to thank you for staying with me for all of this time and really appreciate your input very much. And over to Licha.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Giuliana. And as you see, Giuliana was gracious enough to give us her email address. Just wanted to ask about the cloud. Do we get to see the cloud that we built?
I hope so, but not right now because I'm on a different computer and I have to move it over.
Okay, no problem. Then I will close. So Giuliana, again, thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful and inspiring workshop. And I want to thank Maria Pia Spadafora for always being our technical host. And thank you all for attending this workshop, which was made possible through the financial support of Employment and Social Development Canada as part of the New Horizons Seniors Program. I'd like to wish you all a wonderful weekend. And if we don't see each other before, happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year. It's nice to see everyone. Thank you for supporting Accenti workshops.